Brian Moran, founder of GovernmentCIO. Welcome to GovernmentCIO Magazine.
Not so deep that those of you who are used to working with Agile are going to get bored, and maybe not deep enough for those of you who've never dealt with Agile, but we'll try to reach a happy medium here. As I was introduced, my name is Scott Gould. I'm a senior Agile mentor at GovernmentCIO, and currently we're working on a contract to mentor teams within the VA on the use of Agile and how it can bring them a little bit more speed, a little bit more efficiency, and still work within the parameters of their contracts, of VA's requirements. Most recently, we've worked with several VISTA teams, including meaningful use, cross services. So we do have very recent experience with Agile within the VA. I'll expound on some of that as we go on. The agenda today, I'm going to go over Agile at its core, give you a little bit of a touchstone on Agile. I'm going to compare Agile to one of the other more popular project management styles still used, Waterfall. And I'm going to give you some examples of not only why Agile is more efficient for open source, because I think we've heard from all the speakers today that everybody can agree on that, but some actual examples of how that happened, why it's more efficient, and not just why, but perhaps how Sarah can push for Agile adoption at government agencies to make your own lives easier as you work with open source. Earlier, a speaker had a much larger version of this manifesto here. This is the general idea of Agile. This is Agile at its heart. As you can see, Agile prefers individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It's not instead of, it's just prefers. It wants to have the team speak to each other. It wants to have the team communicate with each other. If everybody on the team knows what everybody else is working on, it allows you to deal with problems, much in the same way that the open source community is open. If somebody is working on something in California and somebody in Minnesota sees that they're having a problem with that coding and it's open, they might be able to offer a suggestion or they might be able to solve that problem. It's much the same way within an Agile team. If you're working on an issue, another team member may have already dealt with that issue, may have a solution for it, or may just be able to offer you a few hours of their time because they see that you're busy and they have a half a day free while they're waiting for a response. So again, it's the preference, it's not the absolute. Working software over comprehensive documentation. If any of you have suggested Agile, you might have gotten the false idea of Agile. We can't have Agile. Agile hates documentation. Agile won't let us document anything. It's completely opposed to it. Not the case. Agile is not opposed to documentation. That's a promise. Agile is opposed to unnecessary documentation. If the documentation supports your project, is helpful to your project, and allows the people that need to see it, see the reporting on your project, absolutely, let's do it. What Agile doesn't want to have is the type of documentation that replaces what could be a simple transparency issue. Part of the reason that so many people want documentation is because they need to know what you're doing. If your management needs to see where your team is, the reason for that is that they have to report it up to their management. They have to be aware of where you're going. And they've got it in front of them in black and white. It's documented, so they're happy. But with Agile, it's all transparent. Your management can listen in on your meetings. If you're using a software tool, such as, say, version 1 Jira, or within the VA RTC, your management can look at your board, see where the stories are. They can get not just a weekly report or even a daily report, they can get an up-to-the-minute report on where your project is. And it's very relaxing with your management, and you know that you might hear nothing from your bosses for 2 weeks, but they might come to you and say, okay, today, where's this project? Why haven't we seen it? You can provide an immediate, up-to-the-minute answer. So again, Agile, not opposed to documentation. It just wants to replace certain unnecessary documentation with the type of transparency that the documentation is there to support anyway. So it just saves you a little time on putting that down in hard copy. Ideally, I understand that there are certain processes where this doesn't happen. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This is another place where Agile differs from a process such as Waterfall. Waterfall is very front-loaded in the contract. Everything is laid out in steps. What are you going to do here? What are you going to do here? What are you going to do here? And it has a tendency to lock you in. And as you in the open source community know, there can be changes. If you're on a 2-year contract, you're lucky, well, not lucky, but you're lucky if that software doesn't significantly change during those 2 years if you're on a waterfall project, because what usually happens is you deliver a project that has had either several updates or the environment in which it exists has been changed or improved, and you're not delivering the most efficient version of what it was you were contracted to deliver. Agile prefers the customer collaboration. Let's say you're doing 2-week sprints in Agile where you agree to deliver a piece of work every 2 weeks. Your customer is invited to the reviews. So as you go over what it is you delivered within those 2 weeks, or in some cases 3 weeks, 4 weeks, your customer can get a good look at that. They can say, you know what, you heard what I was saying, you read the contract, but this isn't exactly what we want. We thought you were going to do this. If that's the case and you need to change, you've only wasted 2 weeks. You haven't turned this into your customer 8, 9 months down the line when you've completely veered off of what they thought you were doing. And suddenly you either have to do a major backtracking, you have to go through major changes, or possibly complete the contract and then negotiate a new add-on to the contract, which nobody would be happy about. Finally on the manifesto, we have responding to change over following your plan. As I already pretty much elaborated, Agile's more nimble. It can turn on a dime. It doesn't have to go through the step-by-step process laid out in the contract, because in Agile, rather than front the contract contains the goal, where you're going to go, what you're going to deliver, the idea around what you're going to deliver and what it should do. The steps to get there are not as clearly defined, so you're not as rigidly held to process as you would be in a process like waterfall. Agile, in fact, is so concerned with making sure that your teams are able to do the jobs that they're best at, that they were hired to do, that there's a particular role, the Scrum Master, who not just facilitates meetings, makes sure the process runs smoothly, cuts people off if they're going off topic or they're lasting or they're speaking too long. But a big part of a good Scrum Master's job is making sure that your team is not bothered by anything that they don't need to be bothered by. I liken them to a concierge, or in that Canadian sport, curling. Your developers are the ones that are throwing the stones. Your Scrum Master is the one running in front of the stone, mopping the ice, keeping it smooth so the stone can go exactly where it's supposed to go. If your developer comes up against a problem, an impediment, you will find this out because every day you have a very fast 15-minute meeting where everybody goes around the circle and states, I'm working on this, I don't have any problems. This is what I worked on, this is where I'm going with it, no problems. And then you have a certain developer, well, I want to work on this is what I'm supposed to work on. I don't have any access to this environment. I was told I'd have access. At that point, the Scrum Master at the end of the meeting goes up to that developer and says, okay, what is it you need? What do I need to do for you? The developer tells them. The Scrum Master says, is there anything else in our backlog you can pull and work on right now? Are any of the next stories lined up for the future sprints something that you can do that you feel comfortable doing? Yes, I do. Great. Pull one of those in. The Scrum Master goes off and deals with the problem. Maybe it takes them an hour, maybe it takes them 3 days of emails and calls back and forth to track down the person that they need to get a hold of to get this issue cleared out. It could even require an escalation, but all of that is handled by the Scrum Master. Your developer is working on something else that's still important to the project, it's just not the exact story. Your Scrum Master comes back to the developer and says, great, I've got it solved, they're going to reach out to you with an email, you will have access, you're not going to have it for 2 weeks. Well, everything was taken care of. You didn't lose 3 days of your developer's time while they tried to go off and deal with this issue, and the developer knows exactly when they're going to have access, so they can plan out the work that they're going to be doing until that access comes in. And that's the idea, part of the idea behind Agile, is just making sure your team is allowed to do what it is they do best, what they're experts in, and the reason you hired them. I'm going to compare Agile to Waterfall a little bit. We're going to go back to the part of the manifesto that was responding to change. Waterfall has a very step-by-step process. Agile, as you can see in part of this diagram, to a certain extent contains much of what Waterfall has in an entire project, an entire year-long project, an entire 2-year-long project. Agile has much of that in a 2-week time frame, in a 3-week time frame. You plan it out, you work on it, you evaluate, you implement. And I know that to some developers, it's not that they fear change, it's that it's very different. They're not used to oftentimes working on something that's so small and so individual. And what I've noticed is occasionally the relief after they get used to it. I only have to worry about this small little piece of work. I test it out when it's done. When we deliver the final project at the end, each little increment, each little piece of work has been tested. We know that to a certain extent it works. When we put everything together, they'll come back to us a lot of times and say, I'm sorry I fought you. In the beginning, we had a 10th as many problems show up in the end delivery software that we could test out as we did before because you pushed us to test out as we go, to do this in these smaller increments. And that's usually some of the pushback you get on Agile. It's a lot of times the developers are used to working on bigger projects. And so when you kind of help them break down their stories into smaller increments that work for 2 weeks, at first they're a little surprised by it. They think, well, this is going to take me a lot more time. I'm going to have to switch and do this and do that. And in the end, they see that it does save time. You test as you go. It's solved. By the time you get to the end, most of the testing has been done.
Well, I just got
if something
it.
does show up, you're able to target it exactly where it was. You're not going to have to go through 20 other issues to weed out where this incompatibility
He just tried to
happens.
call you, Gary.
And so that's one of the benefits of Agile, is this incremental phase where as you go, everything is dealt with, impediments are corrected, and you're able to swap them.
And then you said you could call us back.
In Waterfall, again, this is more of what you're going to be doing. An RFP is going to go out. You're going to agree to deliver a piece of functional software. Maybe it takes a year, maybe it takes 6 months, maybe it takes 2 years. But as I touched on earlier, part of the problems with Waterfall are that so many updates occur in the software community while you're working on it. And even if you provide a completely functional, excellently working piece of software that exactly what you were contracted to deliver, the outside world, the outside environment may have changed. I'm going to go off open source for a second just because it's such an easy example. And say, let's say you were contracted to deliver your own version of Windows XP. It functions perfectly. I'm sure I could log on to any laptop now with Windows XP. It works. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. But the environment has changed. Microsoft has moved on. The main thing is Windows 7, and they're pushing Windows 8 right now. So even though you've delivered that piece of software, it's not exactly as up-to-date as you would want it. And that's what Ocera, that's what open source is about, is bringing in those changes as they occur, bringing in the updates as they occur, or not even bringing in a full piece of software, just pulling in the little pieces that you need. And Agile is the project management style to do that because it's really what it's about. It's about the transparency, but it's also about the incremental work that you do. In Agile, if you have a change, as I mentioned earlier, you just pull it into your backlog, you pull it down into your sprint, and you begin working on it. Part of the problem you can get with Waterfall is, I'm sure none of you here have ever dealt with a change control board or a change request. Nobody? Okay, well, I'll go over it just slightly. I mentioned it to my friend who works in the government, and I said, have you ever dealt with a change request? And he just groaned, and so I figured I was on the right track with that one. Part of the issue is that if you're dealing with the software and a new update occurs, somebody in the open source community develops something that's better than what you're working on, or it's what you were going to work on, but it's done, they've got it, Agile can respond to that change. What Agile would do is you pull that story out of your sprint, out of your backlog, and you replace it with a testing story. So we no longer need to develop this. Now the new story is going to be, we need to certify this. Does it work with V8? Does it work with what we're doing? And that's where you get the easier uptake on new changes that you do. You don't have to put through a change request if you're in a full, idealized Agile environment. You don't need to go through a month, 2 months, 3 months of wait to do that. And that's quite a big deal. I mean, we get pushback on Agile a lot because many people think that they've worked with Agile, but really what they've been working on is it was contracted as a waterfall project, and they've slapped a few meetings in there and given them the names that Agile meetings have, and they're not. You're still working within the waterfall parameters. You have a few meetings that maybe you call it a daily stand-up, maybe you have a planning meeting every 2 weeks, but you're still within the waterfall contract and you're not allowed to do the full Agile implementation. So you will get pushback. A lot of people think that Agile is slow. Oh, it's just extra stuff that we've got to add on. We did Agile and we had a meeting every other day where everybody smiled and brought cookies and hugged each other, and it still took us longer than we thought it was going to. And that's part of the problem, is a lot of people do think they've had experience with Agile, and they haven't. They're having hour-long meetings every morning because it's like a pageant where everybody goes up and explains in minutiae what they're doing, and then they want to do a demo of everything that they've worked on. That's not Agile. They might call it a daily stand-up meeting, they might call it Agile, it's not. It is a 10, 15-minute long meeting where everybody just goes along and gives a quick update on what they're doing. And then any interactions that need to happen can happen afterwards. I point out a problem, somebody else says, I think I worked on that on another project, I can help you. Great, let's talk after the meeting. And that way, if you've got a team of 12 people, our conversation was maybe going to take 15 minutes, a half an hour. I haven't just wasted 12 people's time for a half an hour while we had this discussion in the meeting and holding them up. They're allowed to go out, do their work. I've had the one conversation that can help me. You save their time. I've got my problem solved. All because of a very quick meeting. So again, if you think you're doing Agile and you're having hour-long daily stand-up meetings, so you're having review meetings every 3 days where everybody demos everything they've done, it's not. You're trapped into sort of a weird, nebulous, in-between world, Agile fall or something like that. And it can fool you with the thinking that you're working on it, and it's inefficient. So if any of you have any questions about that, definitely please see me afterwards. I'm happy to try to help you get out of that tar pit if it's where you're stuck. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into change requests right now. Not too deep, but pardon me, I jumped ahead of myself. In Agile, and in open source, the changes can occur immediately. And part of the problems with change requests is they're so cumbersome and they bog you down so much that if you have some pretty skilled developers on your team, they might think, you know what, I can do this. We're not going to have to put the team through a change request. This is what the team needs to do. I can do a workaround. And they're not trying to pull a fast one on anyone. They're really just trying to stop your team from grinding you a halt for 2 months. And so they do the workaround. It looks good. It does what it's supposed to do. The team delivers. And that's okay, except for the fact that it wasn't exactly in the situation, in the software that you thought you were putting out. And worst case scenario, if there's a problem a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line, and somebody needs to go in and look at this code and repair it, they're not looking at the exact code that they thought they were. So you do have a developer, again, heart's in the right place. They don't want this poor team ground to a halt for 2 months. They put in a workaround. They avoid the change request. It could cause problems later. Maybe it doesn't. But the fact that that's even an option, that people are doing that to avoid the change request, does show it's a fairly cumbersome process, and could probably there could probably be a better way to do that, and that's what Agile offers. I'm going to give you one example. Not too recently, but within this framework, there was a grad student in Georgia that discovered a problem in Vista. And under the waterfall system, think about what would have had to happen. This person has now announced, hey, there's a problem, there's a vulnerability in the Vista system that VA uses. Well, under waterfall, you put out an RFP, you get bids, you maybe have a 2-year, 3-year contract to revamp all of this stuff, or maybe you just fix that one part, but it's going to be a 6-month piece of work before you release it. And during that time, everybody out there knows that there's a vulnerability in Vista.